Wadi Dawkah, a journey through Oman's land of frankincense. A podcast produced by Ne in collaboration with Amouage. Wadi Dawkah, home to no less than 5,000 frankincense trees, was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2000 as one of 4 land of frankincense sites. The designation spotlighted the importance of the frankincense trade across the ages in the Sultanate of Oman. Dominique Roques, a perfumery natural ingredient sourcer for more than 30 years, who is also tasked with plotting the renaissance of the precious tree in Wadi Dawkah, is our guide to discuss and document this ambitious project as it unfolds in the coming years.
The Incense Trade Route was a network stretching over 2,000 kilometers and connecting southern Arabia to the Mediterranean. The first proven expedition from Egypt in search of frankincense traces back to the 26th century BCE, and it is the domestication of the Arabian camel that leads to the start of intensive trading of frankincense around the 9th century BCE. Oman appears on the map of the Incense Trade Route a few centuries later when the iconic trading port of Khor Rori was founded. In 2000, UNESCO and the Sultanate of Oman signed a convention placing the land of frankincense on the World Heritage List. The poetic name encompasses 4 extraordinary locations in the Dhofar Valley, a nature reserve in southern Oman. The remains of the caravan oasis of Shisr, the affiliated ports of Khor Rori and Al-Baleed, outstanding examples of medieval fortified settlements, and finally Wadi Dawkah, home of the world's largest extensions of Boswellia sacra trees. Today I have the pleasure of meeting and discussing with archaeologist Sterren Le Maguer-Gillon about how these places all bear witness of an era when the Omani region was a strategic trading crossroads on the Incense Trade Route. So good morning, Sterren.
Good morning, Dominique.
Sterren, it's a pleasure to have you to tell us more about this incredible history. Why was it initially set up, and how central was frankincense trade at the time?
It is actually a very interesting but difficult question to assess with certainty the start of the frankincense trade. What do we know, however, is that the use of frankincense is very ancient, at least from the Bronze Age, which is about the 3rd millennium BCE. But it was not an extensive trade. It really evolved through time from a local, regional trade to a transnational trade, and we will develop this. How central was frankincense trade? It was a very important good, especially during the beginning of the 1st millennium BCE, when frankincense started to be used in the ancient religions, either monotheistic, such as Judaism, and polytheistic, such as the Greek and Roman religions. This product in particular became central in these cults. I can mention Egypt also. It was also quite important. And from here, this trade grew and reached as far as the Mediterranean world.
We often refer to, of course, the Arabic coast as a source of frankincense, and we will, of course, deep dive into the Omani source. But there is also presence of frankincense on the African side, on the other side of the Gulf of Aden. Can you confirm that we have the knowledge that both sides were important from the start?
We don't have much proof of the importance of both frankincense from the start, the Arabian one and the East African one. It is difficult to have precise identification from archaeological context, but they were certainly very important. And as you may know, the land of Punt, this area was very interesting for the Egyptians, and there were probably frankincense and myrrh in this region, and it is probably identified as the eastern coast of Africa. So from a very early period, at least the second millennium BC, the African frankincense was prized too.
So we can imagine like the famous and well-documented story of Queen Hatshepsut launching expeditions to go down the Red Sea in search more than the resin, even for the trees, which apparently she didn't succeed to really root in her homeland.
Yes, it is very true. This is the most famous story about this particular frankincense and the search for Egypt in this commodity. But we have also a text dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE, referring to Punt and its riches.
How was frankincense used and by who fundamentally at these beginnings?
Well, we can for sure know that frankincense was used in domestic context. We have evidence from a site in Oman at Ras Al Jins, where a small incense burner was found in a domestic context, and it dates back to the 3rd millennium BCE. However, in antiquity, frankincense was mainly used in religious context. So it was used either by the priest, but also by the common people to perform the cults for the gods.
Sterenn, it seems quite clear that at some point something happens which is a true revolution in the history of these trade routes, and that's the domestication of camel. Can you tell us when did that happen and why and how it changed almost everything?
The domestication of the camel is quite a long process because it started during the prehistory. We have a huge representation of camels that were found in today's Saudi Arabia, for instance, dating back to the Neolithic period. But first, the dromedary camel was domesticated for its meat, for its milk, for the liver, and so on. It is just quite later, at a period which we don't know precisely, but about the 1st millennium BC, the very beginning, that is to say the 9th, 8th century BCE, people, most probably merchants, domesticated the dromedary camel to the transportation of goods. Before that, they used donkeys, onagers. They are wild donkeys that you can still find in the Caucasian area today. But it was much longer. It was more difficult because they couldn't carry as much goods as a camel can. A camel can walk for huge distances without eating, without drinking. So it is much more appropriate to cross all the desert lands of the Arabian Peninsula from the south, where you have the frankincense trees, up to the north, to the Mediterranean world, where frankincense was sought after.
I think we'll come back to the routes themselves and where they ended, but I was wondering, I guess you will agree that maybe the perfect illustration of the importance and even the magic of these camel routes is the famous, maybe legendary, maybe real visit of the Queen of Sheba going up with her camels to visit King Solomon in Jerusalem. So it's about the time he's constructing the temple. So exactly the period that you mentioned, the minus 900 or something like that. And the idea and the description in the Bible of the richness of these caravans and the quantity of frankincense and probably myrrh that she was bringing is really leaves us all, very impressed.
Yes, this legend or this story in the Bible has certainly ground into a reality during the antiquity, which were this important trade between the South and the Mediterranean world. So it is a history about this relationship which was probably not just about goods and commodities and money, but also sharing knowledge, religion, and histories.
So, what were the first really important points in the north at the Mediterranean shores where those trade routes were heading and even arriving there? We imagine.
In the Mediterranean,
yes.
One of the main arriving points was Gaza. It was so famous and rich that even Alexander the Great besieged Gaza to take this richness, among them frankincense, to send to his teacher, who were so greedy with the use of frankincense to the gods.
Very nice. So, can you tell us now about what could be considered as the second revolution in this long and winding trade routes, which is when something happened that made the ship appear and probably a big rival of the camel?
Yes, the maritime trade developed mainly at the beginning, at the turning point of the Christian era, the last centuries of the first millennium BCE and the first century of the Christian era. Again, this is a long process. We have evidence of the use of boats from the Neolithic in the Persian Gulf, and also later there were important maritime trade routes between India, Oman, and Mesopotamia. But it is only at this period, the first century of the Christian era, when the pilots started to master the monsoon winds. This new knowledge allowed them to cross the Indian Ocean and to go beyond India up to China. So at this point, maritime trade evolved from a local, regional, small ships going from port to port to a more global trade. And as maritime trade developed, caravan trade was less important. Not abandoned, but less important.
This is quite fascinating. I was wondering, one of the destinations in the north, apart from Gaza, was, I think, also Petra, with the Nabatean famous civilization. Do you feel that this new maritime routes could have played a role in the decline of Petra, which was supposed to be rich from the frankincense trade?
Yes, this maritime trade really, I would not say pertinent, because there were also the Roman presence that pertinent to the Nabatean reign. But regarding the merchant and the trade, this was a serious rival.
So back to Oman, you think all across this history, Oman has an important role as a departing point from all these routes, be it camels or maritime?
Yes, Oman played a very important role, first because of the presence of the trees themselves, the Boswellia sacra, in what is today the region of Dhofar, the southern region of Oman. So from here, there were several sites, either maritime or by land for the caravans that were settled in this area, and Oman played a very important role in antiquity, but also during the medieval period.
So as a testimony of this role, in 2000, UNESCO has established 4 Omani sites as part of the land of frankincense. And maybe you can evoke for us these different sites with the remains that we still have and that are each in its own way quite fascinating.
Yes, indeed, there were 4 sites, so 3 of them are archaeological settlements and one is a natural one. So we can start with Shisar. Shisar or Shisur, also sometimes referred to Ubar, but Ubar is a Quranic name. It's more legendary, so I would say the identification of Shisar as Ubar is subject to debate. However, the site, lying around 170 kilometers north of Salalah, in quite at the fringe of the Rub al-Khali, the desert of the desert, played a key role in the caravan trade because of the presence of water. This is mainly a site with a huge pond, natural pond, now empty, unfortunately, but there was a huge pond. So the settlement was implanted there, logically. It was fortified all around. There were walls around these ponds with small settlements, small buildings scattered inside. And it was mainly used for the merchants with their caravans to settle outside the walls, access to the water, and then continue their road to the west, to the actual Yemen and up to the north.
But very interesting. You mentioned the walls. Do you think it's because danger was everywhere? You had to defend the richness of what you were transporting against potential enemies?
I would say you would rather protect the water in this very arid land.
That was the real treasure.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. So it's remarkable that archaeology can teach us that we know for sure there was water, although there is no water anymore.
Yeah, you can see it's like a natural cave, but collapsed now.
Okay. So moving on to Al-Baleed.
Al-Baleed is a very interesting site. So it's much later. Shisar was mainly used during antiquity, and there are also some objects from the Islamic period. But Al-Baleed was an Islamic foundation from the 8th century CE. So it was the medieval port known in the text as Dhofar, which is now the name of the whole region. This site was very famous. It was involved in the frankincense trade. It was also quoted in Chinese texts. So we have evidence that merchants from Dhofar came up to China. It was also visited by famous travelers such as Ibn Battuta from Maghreb or Marco Polo, who described also Dhofar. So the site was used until the 16th century, until the attack from the Portuguese. And after that, the site declined very much, and the settlement moved a little bit to the west to the modern city of Salalah.
Is the site nowadays still close to the sea?
Yes, it is. It is completely on the shore.
Okay, very good. And then we come to majestic Khor Rori.
Khor Rori is a very nice site too. So this was founded in the 4th century BCE by the kingdom of Hadramaut in today's Yemen. So it was an Hadrami outpost in today's Oman. So the main goal of this city was to store all the frankincense collected in the inland. And then it was traded by sea up to Hadramaut, up to today's Yemen, by sea. And then the caravans took the frankincense and went up to the Mediterranean world. But this site was also connected to India. We have evidence from the material, because the excavation here yielded a small Indian statue.
Oh.
For instance, there are also other material, but it was also more internationally connected.
Very good. And I can say for having visited myself that it's really something absolutely to see that gives really an idea of how important, how powerful these places were, and the care that was given to constructing them, and this place of storage of frankincense is really pretty amazing, and the view, of course, is fantastic, and we are lucky to have some traces of this past so ancient that are still with us today. And I think it's very good news that both UNESCO and the Sultanate of Oman are dedicating really efforts to maintain them. And then a little mention of Wadi Dawkah.
Yes, Wadi Dawkah is also an amazing place that I had the chance to visit as well. So this is a natural reserve where you can find Boswellia sacra trees, frankincense trees. Here they are protected. The whole reserve is monitored by the national authorities, and the trees are sapped regularly, but in a manner that is sustainable. So it is also an example for other regions on how you can have the resin exudating, but in a way that respects the nature, the trees, and that is sustainable in time.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Sterenn. And if I may add something, there is also a very important effort that was launched in Wadi Dawkah to protect the trees from the camels. It's a sort of reverse story. The camels that were so precious in the history of frankincense, when the first tender leaves appear on the trees every year, if you let the camels drift, and this is the first thing that they will eat, and this is damaging the trees. So this effort is fruitful, and really the Wadi Dawkah trees are now in full health and really yielding a very nice resin. This is beautiful. So Sterenn, at the end, if I may say so, of our roots, a blunt, direct question: the way you look at it yourself, with all the research that you've had around these themes, in your opinion, when was the golden age of frankincense trade, if there ever was one?
It is difficult. Yeah, I think we can say there was a golden age of frankincense trade. Maybe not because of the quantities of resin traded, but because from the texts, if we look at the Greek or Roman text talking about frankincense, I'm thinking about Pliny the Elder, it was truly something. It was a subject of debate in the Roman Empire. It was a subject of trade. It was a commodity that was sought after, that was very expensive. So yes, it was really something important that was fully part of the daily life for the Kurds, to make perfumes also, not just for religion or funerary practices, but an ingredient of very expensive perfume. So it was certainly very important during the antiquity.
And if we looked further, what happened to frankincense basically after this golden age? We assume it did not disappear. So how would you describe this?
So this trade evolved at the end of antiquity, the beginning of the Middle Ages, for, I would say, two reasons. First, there was the introduction of Christianity in the Roman world, which replaced the polytheistic cults. So at some point during a short period, about 1-2 centuries, the Christian church forbidden the use of frankincense.
Oh, really? It was forbidden?
Yes, it was forbidden. It was too close to the polytheistic cult. It was too expensive.
And that happened in the what we call the Middle Ages?
Yes, when the religion became official during the 5th, 6th century CE. But very soon it was reintroduced because it was also in the Bible, as you mentioned. Frankincense played a very important role in the cults, to the temple, to other rituals. So it was reintroduced. We have evidence from the text and from the objects where you have the famous censers. So after that, frankincense was again traded in Europe for religious purpose, but also for medicine and for perfume. On the other hand, the other important fact is that during the Islamic period, frankincense was also used in an important way, not in a religious context, but in a domestic context. Frankincense and all other incense, I'm thinking about oud, for instance, was and is still burnt in large quantities to welcome guests or just to perfume themselves. And also, as I mentioned earlier, with maritime trade, routes were opened up to China. In China, you have the Buddhist cults, and they are really eager to use frankincense in their rituals too. So thanks to the development of maritime trade, frankincense, instead of being traded in huge quantities to the Mediterranean world, it was traded in huge quantities to the east, to China mainly, not only China, but mainly to China. And this we know from both Arabic textual sources and Chinese textual sources. So the routes changed, but these trades continued to play an important role in the south of the Arabian Peninsula and in Oman in medieval times.
Well, very, very interesting. And since we're mentioning the frankincense traveling the world, the current world, then are you aware of remains of these various routes that outside of Oman are still visible today, still exist?
You mean from archaeological sites?
Yes.
Yes, there are several archaeological sites that testifies to the importance of the frankincense route, because it was so important and it brought wealth to merchants that were nomads, but thanks to this wealth, they sedentarized and they built settlements. You have the example of Najran in Saudi Arabia, in the south of Saudi Arabia, or Qariyat al-Faw. This was on the road from the south of the Arabian Peninsula to the east, up to Mesopotamia. You have important sites such as Dadan or Hegra in the valley of Alula in Saudi Arabia. And you have, of course, Petra, just to mention a few. And you have also all the traces left by the merchants, by the caravans on the roads, with all the epigraphy left on the rocks that they crossed. So this is an important testimony. And of course, you have all the ancient ports of trade along the shores of the Arabian Peninsula and beyond.
As we're getting to the end of our talk, Sterren, do you share with me this feeling that listening to all these incredible stories and the time it took for these routes to develop and grow, it is some kind of miracle that frankincense is still tapped and used today. It's almost 5,000 years old and it still continues. There are not so many examples, especially in perfumery, of ingredients that are so ancient, so important, and still growing today. Do you agree with that?
Yes, it's amazing. Every time I go to the Arabian Peninsula in general, to see how people are proud of this commodity, of this heritage, because not just the product, but also the way you use it is considered a heritage. This, I can witness that in Yemen, but also in Oman, where so many initiatives are implemented to protect, to enhance this heritage. And I'm thinking about modern perfumery, of course, amouage, but also in a smaller scale, all the people, the merchants in the souk, they always want to share with visitors, to tell stories about this. And yes, I think it's amazing.
Yes, and maybe the perfect illustration of this is you mentioned Wadi Dawkah, that you know well. I know it well too, and really witnessing today people in Wadi Dawkah carefully tapping the trees and recovering the resin there. It's very moving because it's really it's witnessing something that belongs to the history of mankind, and it's really fantastic.
Yes, it's really moving because you have here the living illustration of what Pliny the Elder described or what the Arab travelers described too. So, yeah, it's beautiful.
Excellent. Well, Sterren, thank you very much. Thank you for all your explanation and your knowledge. It's very precious, very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Discover more stories and content related to Wadi Dawkah, a journey through Oman's land of frankincense, on podcast.bynet.com and on the main podcast platforms.